Good day and welcome to today's class on history and historiography. In our previous class, we looked at the concept of history, the meaning of history, and the origin of the history. And I promised us that today we'll be looking at history and historiography, the prospects of ICT in historical studies, and the sources of history. ICT simply means information communication technology. So when we talk about the prospects of ICT in historical studies, we are simply looking at what will ICT do for historical studies in the future? Already, ICT has started making a lot of impacts in historical studies. We'll just mention some of them because this is a 2019 history WAEC question. So it's very necessary that you pay attention as we proceed. It uploads it online. Then it is safe when it is uploaded online. Once it's online, then it's safe. No one is tampering with it so long as it is well secured on the site. So people can now easily have access to it. Some access may be limited by premium so that you have to pay in order to get it. But the fact remains that it is now online and it is safely available there. So the next one is that it is transmittable. If you pay and you get premium to it, you see it and you decide that you want to have it and give to someone else or your organization, fine. So you can transmit it from one person to another. These things that I have mentioned now are still on that particular subsidiary name I told you, which is the prospect of ICT in historical studies. So when you gather the information or you capture it directly, you now upload it online, you are making it to be very safe. It is safe. That's one of the attributes again of historical studies. You know, the ones we have in museum, events can happen to it. It can be tampered with. Historical books can be tampered with if they are not online. So when you put these things online, when you save them online, they automatically save them. You know the way we save our pictures and other things, other videos and other things that we have done using ICT equipment. The next one is that every person can now get information, access it, use it the way he or she likes, and you can do this by simple procedures that will help you to understand. You know, most people understand by watching videos, so it makes history to look very interesting when these gadgets are brought into the class and students have access to them. Then the next one will be, it can be for effective learning and teaching. In as much as students are using it to learn, teachers are also using it to teach. The events are stored and played back over and over again. The student can also sit down there and use his or her hand to push these videos forward and backward until they eventually get that information that is so desired. So these websites are secure. Don't forget I told you. So I'll just list out again so that we can move before 5 minutes. We can move to the next point, which is sources of history. So the first one is that it captures events in real time. The second one, these events can be uploaded or transmitted to different people. The next one is that these events are safe. They are safe in the historical sites that they have been sent to. It uses modern gadgets. We have pens that can record. We have small cameras that can video events in real time. So it eases learning and teaching procedures. It makes people understand these concepts easily. So we move on to the next one, which is sources of history. Sources of history, you can classify our sources into documentary or non-documentary sources. We can also say they are written or unwritten, or you can call them primary and secondary sources. Although in some studies, such tertiary sources are also added to it. But for the records, I would just want us to have either primary or secondary, written or unwritten, documentary or undocumented sources. So these are basically types of sources. If we talk about documentary, we're talking about sources that are kept or written down. We move on to the examples of primary sources. When we talk about primary sources, we are talking about original materials that are used in gathering historical information, objective as obtained by the original writer. Archival materials, story sites, and personal diaries. Don't forget that we can also count autobiography as one of the primary sources of history. But for now, let's just take those ones which I have mentioned: oral tradition, artifacts, legends, myths, folklores, archival materials, story sites, and personal diaries. When we talk about personal diaries, we are simply talking about minute-by-minute writing, things that are written down by the owner, somebody that wrote his own ideas. Most of the diaries that we know of the past are eventually gathered together. The writings in those diaries are gathered together to write either a biography or an author's biography. So I will move on now to the secondary sources of history, which are materials and information extracted from the primary source. These are materials that contains evaluations and assessments, those factors or those materials that are gathered for historical purpose from the primary sources. So when we talk about those examples, we are talking about things like textbooks, articles, government publications, biographies, autobiographies, etc. The autobiographies can serve as both a primary source and also a secondary source. The same way that newspapers can also serve as a primary source and also a secondary source. Let me make those examples. So, when we talk about autobiographies, we are talking about books that are written, authors writing their own life story or experiences that they have encountered. That is what we call autobiography. Now, if you have studied the life and times of that particular author, the autobiography becomes a primary source. But if the author is addressing issue, let me take Chinua Achebe's There Was a Country, a book that he wrote about his own experiences in the Civil War. If we are discussing problems with Nigeria, isn't Chinua Achebe's There Was a Country? Or if we are discussing the Nigerian Civil War, isn't Chinua Achebe's There Was a Country? Automatically that will become a kind of secondary source, because though it's his own life experience, others also have their own, since he's not just the only person that encountered the Civil War. We have Adeboyega's Why We Struck. We have so many other books on a command written by Olusegun Obasanjo. We have other books. So when we are looking at the Civil War using Chinua Achebe's There Was a Country, it becomes a secondary source. But when we look at Chinua Achebe's life and times and we use There Was a Country, it becomes a primary source. So sometimes autobiography becomes a primary or a secondary source, depending on what we are using it to investigate. Same way the newspapers serve as both primary and secondary source. If we are looking at the issues that concerns a particular event that occurred today in the National Assembly as written in a newspaper of today, automatically that newspaper becomes a secondary source because the event happened in the house today. But after some years, if we are looking at the activities that took place on that particular day, and we get that particular newspaper for that day, it serves as a primary source since it covers the events of that particular day. So it depends on the usage. Every source, especially newspapers and the autobiography, they both serve as primary and secondary source. So how do we get these particular sources? Sometimes we go on excursion, we go to historical sites, we go on exhibitions, we visit libraries, we visit cultural and traditional festivals, and you sometimes go to museums to check for these historical materials. When we talk about the meaning of historiography, we are talking about the methods that are adopted in gathering information for historical writing. Those critical, analytical methods that are adopted when gathering information for historical writing is what we call historiography. Historiography is basically concerned with the business of gathering information towards writing a critical assessment of every aspect of our history. So I think this have a nice day.